I'm Monica Malpass on Inside Story. A shocking fall from grace 50 years in the making. No longer an icon on television, but a convicted felon. What is the fallout of the Bill Cosby verdict? Let's get the Inside Story. Good morning. Welcome to Inside Story. I'm Monica Malpass, and let's meet our insiders this week. They are Larry Platt, journalist. Good morning. Welcome back to you. Christine Flowers, attorney and journalist. Good morning, Chris. Great to have you. Charmaine Matlock-Turner, nonprofit executive. Welcome as always.
Good morning.
Glad to have you. And Ed Trzanski, foreign policy analyst. Always a pleasure to have you as well, Ed. Really a shock in the courtroom in Norristown, Pennsylvania. 62 alleged victims say they have been vindicated. Bill Cosby's team likely to appeal. But nonetheless, what message does this send for the MeToo movement, if you will, and other alleged perpetrators? What fallout will there be literally for him? How much jail time is anyone predicting? What do you think, Charmaine?
Well, I'm not sure about how much jail time, because I think they definitely were going to appeal, and I certainly let the lawyers talk about that. But as much as for those who were victimized by Bill Cosby, I know that this is a good day. I don't think anybody is sort of like standing up celebrating and letting off balloons. It's a really sad story from the very beginning. Someone who came from North Philadelphia, who had a lot of support in this region and in this community, to turn out to be someone who was actually drugging women and actually taking advantage of them and abusing them is an extremely difficult situation, I think, for all of us to wrap our heads around. But I'm really glad that the criminal justice system stayed active, and ultimately the jury made the decision after hearing all the testimony that he was guilty on all 3 counts.
A shudder has to go down the backs of the likes of the Harvey Weinsteins and other people who have been accused in the industry and throughout other industries as well. Do you think this has a broader implication? I
think it definitely is in tune with the cultural zeitgeist, the MeToo movement, and so forth. But a couple things. One is that Kevin Steele deserves credit for pursuing this after the first trial. They could have taken the easy way out and backed off, especially once the defense produced a witness testifying that Andrea Constand had plotted something. And then the other thing is, let's keep in mind that we would not be here were it not for a comedian in 2014 in Philly at the Helium Club calling Bill Cosby a rapist. These stories had been out there, but for some reason that got out into the culture, and it became this viral thing. And
social media, you can credit with that in part, but it was also in part, from the accounts I read, that Bill Cosby himself would urge young people, specifically in the terms of Bill Cosby, black African-American young men, to get out and work, and he would, chastise them for not being more work active, if you will. And I guess this young man used that as part of his stand-up and was angry that who is someone who's, in his opinion, attacking women from his lofty pillar to tell other young people how to behave. Did you find that interesting?
It's always dangerous to be the moral exemplar, at least to position yourself as such, because that means the fall's going to be that much higher. And in terms of what struck me was the difference between the 2 trials. What I think sealed Cosby's fate was the judge allowing 5 additional witnesses who could talk about prior bad acts. That's a concept of the law, where you establish somebody's got a pattern. And Andrea Constand was not an especially sympathetic witness, but these other women were. And they could establish that he had a carefully thought through methodology where he drew them in and then did what he did. So, and I also agree with Charmaine, this is just tragic. There's someone who really was a very strong positive influence on the culture, and now you find out that in private life, he's just about as far removed from that as you could be.
And ironic on the one hand, because the DA was educated at Temple. Cosby was a pillar at Temple on their board and had attended Temple. So really all around, it's sort of the circle really reconnected.
It is a Greek tragedy. Yeah. It is a Shakespearean level tragedy. And I was talking to my friend Annette John Hall wonderful journalist, and she has a podcast called Cosby Unraveled, and she has spent a lot of time, both last year during the first trial and this year, talking to people, accusers, people who knew him in the entertainment industry, and most especially people from North Philadelphia who grew up around the Richard Allen projects, who grew up in that neighborhood. And the sense of personal devastation is just, it's crushing. And you know, what Ed said is important, that when you are a moral exemplar and you set yourself up as a certain model, it is, people are going to go gunning for you. And as Annette indicated when I was talking to her, she said there were a lot of people in the African American community that were resentful. I want to say one thing, and I'm going to be the fly in the ointment here. I am worried about the impact that this prosecution from last year carried through this year might have on the criminal justice system, and I know we're going to talk about that later on. Andrea Constand was the only individual who fell within the statute of limitations, and as everybody here has indicated, or a lot of people here have indicated, she wasn't a strong witness by any stretch of the imagination. The other women who were allowed in because of prior bad acts, and that under the rules of evidence that's allowed, but you need to weigh prejudice against relevance. And I think that the Me Too movement, that without the Me Too movement, that balance
Is this
would
grounds
have,
for appeal?
would possibly. I'm not a criminal defense attorney, but possibly. I do think that there was a great deal of prejudice, because we're talking about testimony from women who could not, they could not prosecute these cases.
Because it had been too long.
And
the statute had run out for them.
And again, it is their word, and I know we're talking about critical mass, but the Me Too movement has allowed that pendulum to swing so far in the opposite direction. There has to be a course correction here, and as an attorney, I'm worried.
I disagree with that. I mean, Andrea came forward. This happened in '04. She filed charges in '05. So she actually went, she didn't like go to a lawyer to say, look, let's do like a side deal.
Right.
She went to the DA's office
and
in Montgomery County,
decision.
Bruce Castor said, I don't think I have enough evidence. So then pushed her into a position to then have to go the civil route.
Well,
I think it was clear, but I think that because of that, it shows that from the very beginning, she knew that something had happened to her that was not right, that was criminal, and she went to the criminal justice system in order to get help. And I think that that is important as a part of this whole effort, is that women need to be able to feel comfortable that they can come forward, that they're going to be believed. I don't think the pendulum has swung too far. If you go back and look at some of the earlier issues around this, and women sort of coming forward, going back to the Clarence Thomas hearings, if you talk to most people, they would say, what is she up to? Why is she doing this? Isn't she just trying to get publicity? The good news is that most people now say, wow, if that woman made that charge, there must be something serious there.
All right,
we have to look at it.
All right, let's move on. Last comment.
Just because you make the charge doesn't mean there is
exactly,
any
but it doesn't
basis.
mean that
you're,
but it doesn't mean that you're automatically not believed.
Right.
All right, let's move on and talk about another controversial case that had a resolution recently. Meek Mill was released from prison after a probation violation that sent him back to jail. There'd been a big controversy that really enlisted a lot of A-listers, if you will, to his defense. And he, in fact, he did get out of prison, and that very evening went to a Sixers game and was allowed to ring the bell and have a celebrity status. Some people say that was too much at once, and other people say, look, he is a symbol of what's broken, if you will, in some people's opinion, with the probation system. Is it too much too soon? Was he the right sort of poster child for a broken system? Is the system broken?
I think both things can be true. I think that the Sixers, by allowing him to ring the bell, you know, you have to be careful that we don't put Meek Mill on the pedestal like he's Nelson Mandela or something. But that said, he is a symbol of a broken parole and probation system. We have, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has 3 times the amount of people in the parole and probation system as in the incarcerated population. And a Harvard study in August of last year called Less is More found that it is actually a pipeline for mass incarceration. It is not an alternative to mass incarceration, and so that's something. And in the case of Meek Mill, Judge Brinkley sentenced him to prison for parole violations when the prosecutor wasn't even seeking that.
And in fact, that same study showed that there is more probation surveillance, if you will, and supervision, and it's increasing rather than most states are decreasing the amount of supervision they give. So is it headed in the wrong direction? Are we over supervising and therefore creating problems that really making a mountain out of a molehill, Ed?
I don't know that I'd put it that way, but I think Larry's onto something in saying that look, if you look at the United States as compared to other countries, we do over-incarcerate. We have a criminal justice system that is very vigorous to the point where it may be counterproductive. And it's interesting, the last 9 years, the rate of incarceration in the United States has declined steadily. So Pennsylvania tends to stand out a little bit more as a result.
And it tends to harm people of color more than people who are not of color.
It tends to be prejudicial to people based on class. And yes, it captures people of color, but also poor whites. With that said, I do think the Sixers it's the wrong message to send, the wrong avatar, especially because you want to reach out to people of goodwill, get them to pay attention. He is not the ideal avatar for the issue. He's just not.
You wrote a column about this, Christina. You had very strong feelings. Tell me about that.
I did. And actually, you know, what Larry said, I agree with. I think that there is a legitimate issue about his prosecution, although I truly find nothing wrong in what the judge did. I believe she gave him opportunity after opportunity. But you can set that issue aside. That wasn't the focus of my column. The focus of my column was, this is not a person that you should send a helicopter for, copter him to the last, you know, this major game, and put him up front ringing the Liberty Bell to make this some symbolism of this, you know, this person has you know, he's Nelson Mandela. That upset me because I know how much those tickets are. I know how much a guy, Joe Schmo from, you know, Bridesburg, is paying to get a seat at that playoff game. And he's standing there, and then you have someone who is a convicted felon. Let's not forget the fact that, you know, Meek pled guilty to the charges that were against him. And he's being held up as this grand symbol. So I wrote that, and I said, you know, like Michael Corleone, the Sixers, you are dead to me. Well, you don't do that in the city of Philadelphia around playoff time.
And in fact, there was a quick reaction from one of the NFL players. Let's read. Malcolm Jenkins had a tweet about your column that sort of took it to the other side and gave another perspective. So this is the dumbest comment, if you will, that he's ever heard. If you don't understand why Meek Mill and his story are as important now, then you maybe have chosen to have your eyes closed to the problem. Charmaine, you see it a little differently. We do need a poster child for probation over violation.
I absolutely do. I mean, look, we can argue over the symbolism of whether or not he should have a helicopter, and, you know, the owner of the Sixers, you know, how he should spend his money, and whether or not he could sit on a particular row at a game. That is, to me, is not the issue. The issue here is that we have a system that is broken as it relates to how we treat people who have offenses that we ultimately need to let go. To have someone at 19 be charged with crimes that are not major crimes, but serious, but not major, to be on probation for 10 years so that anything, if you cross the street the wrong way, if you do small things that are parole violations, you ultimately get an opportunity to be dragged back in. Maybe you don't get sent to jail for 2 years, but you're constantly dragged back in. You're constantly worried about, what's my life going to be like?
So
and I think the
I
think the poster child for that issue is extremely important, and in a world where media and celebrity come together around how you solve problems, I think that he's going to be an effective spokesperson for this.
I think that's a good point, and I'm concerned about the probably millions of African American kids who are in the system now who don't have sports team owners and so if anything good can come from this, it's reforming the system so that those kids get a better shot at justice.
But if you heard what he said, and he said, look, I'm going to be a spokesperson for those people. He hasn't sort of said, okay, now I'm a big celebrity, it's all about me. One of the things I was glad to see is that he's been in touch with some of the ministers in Philadelphia and says, I want to be a part of this conversation. I want to be a part of solving this problem. Let's give him an opportunity to do that.
All right, we're going to take a break. Inside Story continues right after this.